The Blackmagic Camera App is the most complete video shooting app available for your iPhone. In today's video, I'll show you all the features of the Blackmagic Camera App, and I'll also share with you my preferred settings that I use when I use the Blackmagic Camera App to film underwater. Right after the intro. Hey there underwater image makers, it's great to see you back here on the channel with me today. Ever since I released a video a little while ago where I shared my opinions on why I think it is a good idea to use the Blackmagic Camera App when we use our iPhones to film underwater, I have received quite a few requests that I should be making another video going deeper into the app features and also sharing more of the settings that I personally use when I use the Blackmagic Camera App in combination with my iPhone to film underwater. And this is exactly what we're doing today. I'm gonna try to keep this as brief as possible, but I'm also going to try to go into as much detail as necessary to show you every single menu or every single icon that you can manipulate on the Blackmagic Camera App. We'll go through all the different settings and I'll show you which settings I personally use when filming with the Blackmagic Camera App underwater. Now today's video is brought to you by Divevolk. Divevolk, the manufacturer of the unique Divevolk C-Touch 4 Max underwater smartphone housing, the only housing actually making us capable of using the Blackmagic Camera App even underwater. If you're not familiar with the Divevolk gear lineup and their housings, check it out through the link in the video description below. You'll also get a 6% discount if you decide to purchase any of the Divevolk gear through that link, or alternatively, you can simply use the code Matthias Lebo at checkout. Thank you very much Divevolk for creating these amazing housings and giving us the opportunity to use such a thing as the Blackmagic Camera App even when we film underwater. Alright, and now let's dive deep into the menu structure, the features and the settings of the Blackmagic Camera App. For that, we're gonna be opening up the Blackmagic Camera App on our iPhones. Don't worry, if you haven't downloaded it yet, I'll place a link down in the video description below so you can download it directly from the App Store. Now, up and opening the app, you'll see the interface of the Blackmagic Camera App. We'll go into all the individual different features in a minute, but what I want to do first is go and play around with the main settings. If you go all the way to the right bottom corner, you'll see a little wheel which says settings. Press on that and you will get to your settings there. Now we'll go from top to bottom and I will explain every single setting to you and also how I do set each of these settings, preferably for myself personally when I use the Blackmagic Camera App for filming underwater. So let's start with the record section. Now we have the first option there is our codec, and you have a variety of different codecs up there that you can choose from, and depending on what you're going to be using, the footage that you record, you're going to be choosing a different codec. Most of the time you will be using the HEVC codec, which is a high quality, highly compressed codec, which means it gives you smaller file sizes, but still a very, very high quality in terms of the image quality that you're getting out of that codec. The slight negative using this codec is that if you have an older computer, it is gonna be a little more challenging for your computer to work with that codec, to unwrap that codec in the editing software and to fluently play it back. So if you have a rather older computer, which has a bit of issues performance-wise, you might want to switch to the Apple ProRes 422. This is a codec that is less compressed, so the file sizes are much bigger, but they're gonna be played much easier on even older machines. It's just not gonna be as strenuous on your computer to play back those files. Quality-wise, the Apple ProRes 422 is going to be a slight bit better, higher quality than the HEVC codec, but honestly speaking, especially if you play it back and watch it on a smaller screen, you won't really see much of a difference there. So I will go for the HEVC, that's what I usually do, and then we'll go to resolution. Here you've got your resolution settings. I always keep it on the highest one, which is your 4K resolution. Color space. This is where you can define the color space that your video is going to be recorded in. Now you've got the choice between Rec 709, which is your standard normal color space. You can also use Rec 2020 if you want to shoot in HDR, which is high dynamic range. Then you've got P3D65, which is a higher gamma codecs, which potentially can give you more intensified colors, but it requires a lot more post-production work on their codec, so or on their color space, I better say. So I would not really use that personally. And then you've got your Apple Log HDR, and that's what I use most of the time, because that way all your videos are going to be recorded in a log format, Apple's own log format. It's also going to be recorded in HDR, and it's going to give you a lot more leeway, a lot more flexibility when it comes to color correcting in post. So I usually use the Apple Log HDR color space there. Then we have our time code display, and this is basically, you can say, record run or time of the day. I usually keep this on record run. I don't really need to know what time of the day this has been shot. Then we have our time-lapse recording. You can turn that on if you want, and then one further down you can define how many frames or how often a photo will be taken for the creation of a time lapse. You can go from every 2 frames all the way to every 10 minutes. Time-lapse underwater is not really something that I do very often, so I keep this off, but it can be something interesting if you want to place your smartphone somewhere on a tripod and just activate the time-lapse recording, leave it there for a couple of minutes, and then see what you can capture that way. It can be interesting, I just don't really use it that much myself. The last option, or the last point that we have there, is your media drop frames. This is basically where you can define what should happen if on recording the Blackmagic Camera App drops some frames. It can either alert you or you can stop recording. I don't really want to stop recording even if it drops some frames, so I just have it on alert, so it tells me if it's getting into some issues and dropping some frames. Let's move one further down to the camera settings. On the very top we have enable vertical video. I always have that on. This basically means that, and I'll show you here while I have this off and we go back into our recordings. Now what happens here, if I turn it around and I have it off, it changes like this, and I'm still recording in the 16:9 aspect ratio. If I now activate, let's go back and activate enable vertical video, go back to the mode here, and I turn around now, it will actually not stay in the 16:9 aspect ratio, but it will go into the vertical option. So this can be very useful if you shoot a lot of vertical content for YouTube Shorts, for Instagram, for TikTok, those kind of platforms. This is a useful feature. I would always keep that on, because then whichever direction you turn your phone, it is gonna be adjusting to that. Then we have trigger record indicator. Basically, you can define whether you want to have a beeping and the flashing, or no indication when you start recording. I don't need that underwater anyway, so we'll leave that on none. Use volume button to trigger record. is a nice feature on land, but underwater through the housing, we can't really use that. So there's no point in keeping that on. We can just as well turn it off. Lock white balance on record. This is an incredibly useful feature because it means that once you've set your white balance and you've started recording, the white balance will not shift as some things might change in the scene. So your white balance setting is gonna stay the same. This is incredibly important when you take that shot into post-production later on and wanna try to grade and color correct that shot. If you have a shot with changing white balance throughout the shot, it is nearly impossible to get a good color grade, a good color correction on that clip. But if you have a consistent white balance reading throughout the entire clip, then it's just going to be much easier to correct and color grade that. So I would definitely keep that on. Then we have our shutter management, and here we can either go to speed or angle. I personally like angle. It's not going to be very important to us with the Blackmagic Camera App. I'll explain that to you a little bit later why this is the case. But nevertheless, I would go to the shutter angle rather than the speed. The next one is your flicker-free shutter based on. This is again something that you might need when you're shooting above water on land and in environments with artificial lighting. Underwater, that's not really an issue. I've never had an issue with that. I always leave it at 50 Hertz as it is standard. This also has to do with the LED lights that we use underwater. They don't really flicker. They don't have those issues from my experience. So that's not something that you should really worry too much about. The next one is your lens correction. I would definitely keep that on because that's what's going to help you correct some distortions in your lens, especially in the wide angle lens on your iPhone. It's not going to get them away completely. That's just something that happens when you go underwater with the different refraction of the light entering the lenses and stuff. So what you can do to counteract that is use the wide angle conversion lens, but that's a little off topic here. I would definitely keep the lens correction on, but it's not really gonna do a huge deal underwater. Anamorphic D-squeeze, I don't think we'll be using anamorphic lenses, at least I don't use any anamorphic lenses with my iPhone underwater, so that's not really something that I worry about too much. Flip image for SLR lenses. Again, if you're using SLR lenses on your iPhone, this is a setting that you can use. We don't really need that underwater, so we can forget about that. Then we have lock current orientation. I'll show you what this means. If we go back now, and if we turn our phone from horizontal to vertical, you see how the whole menu changes. It just stays on the top or switches from around. Now if we get back in here, if we lock that current orientation and we go back here, now you see how the metrics, the settings, the on-screen dials, they don't change anymore. It goes into vertical and horizontal mode, but it doesn't change anymore. So that's what this is. I personally, to be quite honest, don't like that. I like when it's changing, so I keep that off. And mirror front facing camera, this is a personal preference. I mean, we're not really gonna be using the front facing camera while filming underwater, I would say, too often. So you can do whatever you want with that. This is the standard setting, is on, so I just keep it on that. All right, moving along to the next section, which is our audio section. And this one we can basically just go through very quickly because audio is not really something that I'm worried too much about underwater, simply because I'm adding all the audio effects and everything in post-production, so I'm not really relying on the audio that is being captured by the iPhone directly underwater while I'm taking the shots. So all of these settings, they're not really important to me. I'm not monitoring it. It's like I can really just skip all that stuff. I don't really need to go into any details here. That's not important for us for filming underwater. What is important though is the monitoring and the next section there. Up on the top we have our focus assist, and here you have two different different options. You can either use your peaking, which is basically just a white outline on the thing that is in focus. And specifically, if you're using manual focus, this can be very, very helpful to make sure that you nail focus, right? Or you can use the colored lines. And the colored lines will basically just give you the outline of the things that are in focus, but in a colored representation. I usually like the colored line, so I'll leave that on. And then you can define the color that you want to have those colored lines in. You have white, black, red, green, or blue. I usually use red because that is very easily visible down there. Let me show you what this looks like. So if we go back onto the screen, you can see now those colors, those the red dots, the red lines. And if I change my focus here manually, you can see how that is changing, and it's actually showing me which part of the image is in focus and which part isn't. Very handy, as I said, especially if you're using manual focus. The next one we've got there is the guide's opacity. We'll look into how you set the guides onto the screen. And here you can set the opacity. I like to have it as a 25%. I don't like to have it too prominent. Then you have your guides color. You can do white, black, red, green. I actually like green for some reason. I don't really know why. So I keep that on green. Then you have your HDMI out, which it's not an option for us. We can't connect any HDMI to our phone while we have it underwater, so that's not really anything that should bother us. Then we have our display audio meters. We don't need that because we said we're not worried about audio. When filming underwater, we'll add audio effects and stuff later on in post-production. And I just want to keep my screen as clean as possible, so if I don't need it, I'll take it out. Display histogram. Yes, I do want to have my histogram because it helps me determine whether or not my image is well exposed. So I want to keep that on. And then display storage status. I like to have that on there as well. So let me show you here. We've got our histogram down on the left bottom corner, and we've got our remaining storage space shown down in the middle there. So going back here, the next one is display upload status. This is if you'd use the Blackmagic cloud and you would upload your footage directly onto the cloud, obviously after you come back from the dive. I don't really do that. I don't use the Blackmagic cloud, so I don't really need to know that. And then you have the display battery indicator. You can turn that on too. This will show you how much battery you have left on your phone, and you see this in the upper right hand corner there. I find that quite useful to just know, okay, how much juice have I got left on my phone. Right, going back in there, and we've reached the end of the monitor section. Let's go into media. Here we have upload clips. This is again if you want to upload your clips to the Blackmagic cloud. You can define here whether you want to upload proxies only or the originals as well. Again, not something that I do, so I just keep it on the proxies only, but I keep the auto upload deselected. Also, if you do that, if you do work with the Blackmagic cloud, maybe the enabling the upload over Wi-Fi only is a good option. Otherwise, if you don't have an unlimited data package, it will just eat through your data, your mobile data quite quickly. So keep that on if you're using the Blackmagic cloud. I don't, so I keep that off. Another important thing here is save clips. Now, there's different options you can choose here. You can either save your clips to the app only, and then they will be available here in the media section. You've got all your clips there. And then if you want to have them on your camera roll, you will have to select individual clips. You can save them or send them or save them somewhere like your camera roll or a file or something. Alternatively, you can also save them in-app and in the photo library directly, so you don't have to transfer them to the photo library afterwards anymore. Or you can go to files and you can just save them somewhere in a file, in a folder that you create. This can also be an option. I personally choose the option in-app only, so then after the dive I can go into the media section of the app and select the clips that I want to import into the camera roll or to a specific folder only. I just find that the easiest way for me to work with the files, but this is a personal preference, obviously. The next thing that we have here is your location data. If you don't want to have your location data saved to the clip, you can deselect this, and then right down at the bottom you can define the file name convention. So you can say whether you want to have the Blackmagic Camera filing system or whether you want to go with the just normal iOS filing system or naming system for your files. I actually keep them as the Blackmagic Camera filing or naming system, so I know that these clips have been taken with the Blackmagic Camera app. So let's move into our next section, the LUTs. As we said before, you can record in a Apple log picture profile. And if you do that, then your images are gonna look very flat. This is a very flat image, but we can correct that by overlaying a LUT onto this image. Now we need to select display LUTs, and then we can select the LUT that we want to. Standard, you have the Apple Log to Rec 709 installed into the Blackmagic Camera app. This is your normal conversion LUT that is made by Apple. So that's already been pre-installed, and you can select that one. You can also import different LUTs if you want to. You know that I have a LUT pack that is made for iPhone specifically, for underwater footage taken with iPhone specifically, so you could even upload these LUTs in here and then overlay them on your footage. But I wouldn't recommend this because they're not conversion LUTs, they're actually creative LUTs for color grading. To be able to see a proper representation of the footage that you're taking, you want to use a conversion LUT like the Apple Log to Rec 709 LUT that is included here already. So by using that, and then we need to go back, I'll just show you and see now the difference. Now you have a much more intensified image and an image that is a lot closer to what you've actually seen. Next, we can decide whether we want to record the LUT to the clip. This basically means that we're baking in that specific LUT that we've selected here into the recorded image, and we cannot go back to a log image in post-production. Most of the time that's not a problem because applying this conversion LUT onto the clip would be the first step in a post-production process, in a color grading process anyway. The only reason where you don't want to have this selected is if you're not sure how you want to grade your footage afterwards, and you're not even sure whether you want to use the regular conversion LUT, but you might want to go a little more crazy and creative with correcting and grading your footage. In that case, I would not turn this on, and then you'll end up with the washed out log style footage in your post-production, and you can just do everything manually. Otherwise, you can turn this on and have the LUT already baked onto your clips, and you can save yourself that step of having to do that manually on every clip once you get to post-production. The color space tag, you can select different things here. I always leave it on same as capture. Right, moving down to the presets. The presets can be quite useful because what you can do here now on a preset is set separate scenarios, and it's like on larger cameras where you have your modes that you can set. You can do the same here. It's pretty much the same thing. So you can define, if you want to do a new preset, whatever is set into the Blackmagic Camera app now, this is what we're saving. So if I go to save, and I can now say, okay, this is my, let's say, macro setup, my macro preset. I can save this, and then if I want to switch in between a wide angle and a macro setup, I don't have to go and do all the settings manually every time myself, but I can just switch in between the different setups here, the different presets, and have everything right there. And you might want to do like with macro, you might want to go with 60 frames per second, and with wide angle, you might want to go with 30 or 24 frames per second. You might want to have different white balances, because with macro you'll be using the lights that you have on your iPhone underwater, so you know the color temperature and you can set that manually. And then with wide angle you want to rely on auto white balance with a red filter, so you can prepare all these things in here, and then once you get underwater you don't waste time fumbling around trying to find the appropriate settings for each of the individual scenarios that you're filming, but you can just go to the settings and quickly change them. So that's a quite useful tool there. Accessories, not really something that we use. That's more something for on land. Underwater, that's not really, we're not going to be using a wireless lens control or anything like that underwater. A Blackmagic Cloud, again, you can log into the cloud here if you're using that service. I am not. You can reset all the camera settings or all the app settings to the default settings. This is your app version where you can see what version you're running. I'm running the latest version, which is 1.3.00111. And then you also have the, right at the bottom down there, open Blackmagic Camera Settings. If you press on that, you'll get into the settings of the Blackmagic Camera App. You can have a look at that if you want to, but there's no need to change much there in my opinion. And that's us with the settings. So let's go all the way up to camera. And if we press that, we'll get to our camera settings and the screen, the layout that we see when we're actually using the app underwater. Right, so let's go here from left to right. On the top, go through all the different settings, and I'll show you what they're used for and what the options are and what settings I use there as well. So on the very top left corner, we have our lens selection, and obviously we can choose here our wide angle lens. We have our ×1 lens, the 24mm. Now with the latest firmware update, you now also have a 48mm lens, which is an optical lens. And then we have, with the iPhone 15 Pro Max that I'm using here, a 120mm. Obviously, I'm too close to my aquarium, to my skull head and my tiger shark here, so I need to move my phone further back, and if I do that, then the image comes in focus. That's just the minimal focusing distance that the 120mm lens has. You need to be further away from your objects there. I usually use the one-time lens for just regular wide angle stuff. Sometimes if I want to shoot like really wide angle stuff, I go with the ×0.5 lens, the wide angle, the ultra wide angle lens. But if you use that, make sure that you use the wide angle conversion lens that is also made by Divevolk. That way you will get, not rid, but you will minimize the corner blurriness and distortion in the corners that is normally caused by the refraction of the light if we use a ultra wide angle lens behind a flat port. Right, so then the next one is our frames per second. So we can choose really anything here. We can go from our 23.98, 24, whatever you want to choose. Most of the time I shoot in 60 frames per second because that gives me a little bit of flexibility in post-production for slowing down the footage. That makes it easier for me. The next setting is our shutter speed. We have set this to angle before, and now we can go and adjust this manually. We can say like I want to have 180-degree shutter angle, which would be your normal shutter angle that you're aiming for. Now, a bit of a problem here is that shutter angle and ISO, they are connected to one another here on the app. So if I manipulate shutter angle and I want to set it manually, then the ISO also drops from auto to manual adjustment. And this I find a little problematic. Doing that underwater, I actually like to have the exposure being taken care of by the camera mostly. So what I would do here, I wouldn't use this in manual mode, but you can, and this is what I normally do to set the exposure on my image. If I just press onto the screen somewhere, it will adjust the exposure, right? Then I can adjust the exposure here, I can adjust the exposure here, and it just changes the exposure. The shutter angle here is not changing much, but you can see that the ISO, depending on where I click, the ISO is going to be changing quite a little bit, and the image changes as well. If you want to lock auto exposure onto a specific area of your image, then like in the native app, you can just press and hold. And once you get that circle, the auto exposure and the autofocus are locked to this area. And then if you want to deselect that, you can just press it onto like another area and it will focus and expose to that specific area. So that's actually quite easy. That's how I use the exposure on the app that way. So I keep shutter and ISO on auto and just, you know, manipulate it as I select different parts of my image that I want to have the exposure being set to. So ISO is the next one. As we said here, you can also do that yourself and adjust it to your likings. I find that to be a little too much working with all that stuff underwater, so I just keep it on auto, as I said, and use the one press auto exposure. White balance. Now you can do different things here. You can either select auto white balance, and then it will just go with the auto white balance, which oftentimes works quite well in my opinion, especially if you're using a red filter while filming underwater. But you can definitely also deselect auto, and then you have presets like your daylight, your tungsten, you have your shades, all that sort of stuff. That's not very useful for underwater, but what is useful, you can set the Kelvin reading. And the deeper down you go, the higher this reading should go, so introducing more warmth into your image. And this is something that you can just play around with a little bit and try and see what works best for you. You can always just use auto to get a basic idea of what the camera thinks should be the appropriate white balance, and then you can fine tune it yourself manually if you want to. The next one is our tint. And with the tint, this is something that I oftentimes do actually adjust, and you can introduce either more of a magenta or more of a green tone to your imagery. Usually underwater we want to have more magenta, so we're going to go into the plus rather than the minus numbers and just give it a little extra reddish into the image there. But again, this is something that you can play around a little bit. White balance and tint are also connected, so if you use auto white balance, the tint is also going to be set on auto, and if you use manual white balance, select it manually, the tint will also be selectable manually and vice versa. So just keep that in mind. You can also lock that if you want. And then both of these tint and white balance are locked. But I mean, that's not really a big issue because we set previously in our menu settings that white balance will be locked as soon as we start recording. So this will already been taken care of. So let's go to the remaining settings, the remaining features that we can see along the right hand side above and below the record button. If we go to the very top one, here we've got a couple of settings. The very top one is our zebras, and if we activate that, you can't really see much because it's properly exposed the image right now, but if we manipulate that and overexpose it, you can see now that we have some zebras on the skull, which basically means that this part is overexposed, and that way you can adjust and control your exposure a little better if you want to keep that on. I personally don't have that on. I find it a little too distracting, so I have that turned off. Then we have our our colored lines, or our peaking, I'd better say. And here you can activate it. So if I deactivate that, you see that the peaking, the red color that we had before disappears. Here it's on, and then I can define how intense I want to have this. I normally have this somewhere between 85 and 100%, depending on how dominant you want to have this. I'm going to put it to 90% now. Then just below we have our grids, and what I like to have here, I turn it on, and what I like to have here is my grid of thirds, giving me a good representation of where to place my subject within my frame. As you know, with composition, you should normally try to place it within those intersections of the lines. So you can see the tiger shark's pretty well placed there in the image. The skull's actually not too bad either, but that's something that I find very useful. I also like to have the middle point visible on my screen, so I know where the complete center of my image is. Then the next one is our aspect ratios. We can play around here a little bit with different ratios. So let's say if you want to be recording horizontally, but you want to know what is in frame, if you want to crop that to a vertical image later on, you can use the 9:16, for example. This is only a overlay, so it's not what is recorded. Recorded is still the 16:9 aspect ratio, but it's just showing you what would be in the frame if you'd crop it later on to a certain aspect ratio. And you can play around with different things here. I don't really need this, honestly, so I keep this off. I want this off. Then we have here our save lines. Basically, you can, if you turn that on, it will give you like a square or a rectangle on your image, on your frame, showing you, giving you a bit of a safe area around the edges. If you need that to make sure that you don't place anything too close to the borders, I don't really need that, so I deactivate that. It's not really important to me. We have our false colors. If we activate that, they will show us a different interpretation of which part of the image is exposed in which way, color-wise. So you can see that all that purple stuff that we see here, that is exposed properly. And then we have our gray, which is a little overexposed. So depending on how exposed your image is, it's going to be giving you a different color representation here. This can be quite useful. I use that every now and then if I want to make sure that everything looks okay, but I don't really use it on a regular basis underwater. And then we have our LUT, and this is where we can activate and deactivate the LUT that we have preset and predefined previously in the settings area. So this is the image that what it looks like as a Apple log image, and then if we apply the LUT, the conversion LUT, this is what it's going to look like, which makes a big difference. Moving along to the next one down the line, which is our focus, and here we have the option of just using auto focus, which works quite well in my opinion most of the time, or you can deselect auto and use manual focus by just sliding down here and going up or down. The number that you're seeing here is actually a representation of the focal distance that's from your lens to your object, and it tells you how far your optimal focus point is from the lens. So here, let's say with the peaking, we can quite clearly see that our tiger shark is in good focus right now, and if we come a little closer, then our skull there is going to be in focus and the tiger shark is going to be a little out of focus. Now, a feature that has been introduced with the newest firmware update, the latest firmware update, is rec focusing, and you can preset 3 different focusing points and have the camera run through those settings or through those focal points, automatically rec focus. This can be useful, but only if you have a stationary camera, so you need to have a tripod. You need to have it placed somewhere, and you need to have an object which is not moving, like some sort of coral, maybe a nudibranch that's not moving around, stuff like that, a shell, whatever. Stuff that is not moving and that you can make use of this. Like for example, if we want to do here and we place our first focal point there, then we have, let's say, the eye here. We place our second focal point there. It's actually up here, there. And then we can define, say, okay, I want this to take, let's say, 2 seconds to rec focus from point 1 to point 2. Oops. And I want it to go just one way, not around. And then if I press the play section, it will rec focus from one section to the other. Now, because these are fairly close together, you can't really see much of a difference, but it is useful if you wanna do that rec focus very precisely, which can be hard to do underwater by hand. So that's a nice little feature. I don't know how useful this really is underwater. I haven't tested it underwater yet because it's really just been released a couple days ago with the latest firmware update, but I can see this as a nice extra feature in the focusing section there. I'll go back to autofocus. The next one here is our exposure. And here we can either go with auto exposure, and this is like an exposure compensation, or we can say, no, I don't want an auto exposure. I want the image to be rather on the darker side. So I'm just going to be underexposing the image generally by -1.5. Or you say, no, I'm actually in a darker environment. I want to make it brighter. So I'm just going to be overexposing the image by +1.0, and you can adjust that here, or as I said, do the auto adjustment or the auto exposure. Just below we have our record button. If we press that, the recording will start. One further down we have our stabilization. You can have it off, you can have it on standard. You can see that there is a slight crop. If we have it off, we have the regular 24mm. If we go on to standard, it just crops in a little bit so it can stabilize the image. We have our cinematic and we have extreme. I usually keep it on standard. That's good enough for me. We have our little lens here, and with that little lens, that's your digital zoom. So regardless on what lens you're on, you can then use that magnification glass and zoom in. Keep in mind that this is a digital, not a optical zoom, and it's always preferred to use any of the standard lenses and just keep it at that focal length and that magnification. Don't really use that magnifying glass. I never use that, and I don't recommend you to use that either. The last section down on the bottom, that's your metadata that you can enter, so it actually gets saved with the file. Again, this is something that is probably used for larger productions that need to have their stuff labeled properly. For us underwater, I don't do that underwater. It's just too fumbling to do that. You can if you want to, but I don't really see much of a use doing that underwater and having that in the metadata of any of the clips. And then let's go to the last 4 sections. We've already looked at camera. That's what we've just looked at now. The next one is our media. Here you've got all your recorded clips visible, and you can also play them back and see what they're like, and select them and then decide which ones you want to import into a folder or onto the camera roll and which ones can be deleted. The next section is for your Blackmagic Camera Cloud again, and then at the bottom we have our settings that we have already looked at. And this concludes our full rundown of the Blackmagic Camera App for filming underwater. I hope I was able to help you understand the functions, features and settings of the Blackmagic Camera App a little better. If that's the case, then please do hit that like button and subscribe to the channel if you haven't yet, so you're not missing out on any future underwater video related content that will be uploaded here. Should there be any questions about the Blackmagic Camera App, leave them down in the comment section below. Other than that, thank you so much for your time and for watching. Have a great week. Keep capturing all those amazing underwater adventures of yours, and I look forward to seeing you back here on the channel for the next video next Tuesday. Take care and have a great week.